Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. It's 11 o'clock Mountain Time, 10 o'clock Pacific Time, and we've got a lot of content to cover today. So welcome to the second webinar in our annual FSMA Produce Safety webinar series. Today is the second, like I said, presentation, and this one is on record keeping for food safety, simplified. It doesn't mean that we're going to make it absolutely easy and pain-free, but we're hoping to be able to just help you along in record keeping so that you're more effective, more efficient, and understand the requirements a little bit better. We welcome everyone. We're so glad that you could join us. For those of you that joined us last week or 2 weeks ago for our webinar, we will have that recording up soon and make it available to anyone who didn't. And the same with today's, we will be recording it and making it available, as well as all the accompanying handouts and resources that we share today. So I'm Ariel Agenbroad, University of Idaho Area Extension Educator. I've been with the FSMA Produce program for almost 10 years now, starting as a collaborator with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture on our first cooperative agreement with FDA, on the advisory board for FSMA, and now as part of the team as a lead trainer for the Produce Safety Alliance and as a representative from University of Idaho on our statewide food safety team. And if you've been to our Produce Safety Alliance grower trainings, then you might know me from the Writing Your Food Safety Plan. And we often get some questions about record keeping in that section. And so this is really pulling out some of the resources and the key aspects of that presentation and really just drilling down on record keeping in particular. So a few housekeeping items just in general for the webinar so that you have hopefully a good experience today. It will sometimes help, especially if your broadband can be shaky, to not have other programs or windows open and running on your computer. If you're watching from a phone or something like that, same thing. If you're having problems with the sound, you can always put a question in the chat or Q&A. But if it's only one or two of you, then typically it's going to be a problem with your system. And so a few things you can do: you can double check that your microphone and speakers are selected correctly up in this top bar, or you can always call in on the call-in number and watch it on your screen and listen on your phone. I will say that sometimes my sound gets funny. If you would let me know in the chat if that starts to happen, it's a pretty easy fix for me to do, but I can't preempt it unless I know it's happening. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat. You can also put them in Q&A, and then they're only visible to the panelists. If you put them in the chat, your questions are visible to everyone on the webinar. And that's sometimes a great way to start a dialogue and have a conversation. But if there's something you just want us to see, please put it in the Q&A. And like I said, we will be recording this presentation and posting it online and sending you the link so you can view it later. We're also going to be covering quite a few resources today, and we're going to share those files out with you throughout the day in the chat, but then also in a follow-up email. And we hope to keep this right to an hour with time for questions and have you out of here by 11 o'clock Pacific, 12 o'clock Mountain. So we have a few goals for today in putting together this presentation. So we hope that by participating in today's webinar on record keeping, you will have the opportunity to review the required records that are needed for compliance with the FSMA Produce Safety Rule. We hope that you'll increase your knowledge of what records your farm operation needs to keep. And then we'll explore some templates, tips, and tools to make record keeping easier and more efficient. So that's our plan for today. We hope that we meet these goals. So let's jump in. Let's start with a review of the produce safety record keeping requirements. So which parts of the produce safety rule require that you keep records? Well, these are the primary parts that may have records associated with them that may impact you and your farm. So number one, exemption and qualified exemption in subpart A. the personnel qualifications and training in subpart C, agricultural water, subpart E, biological soil amendments of animal origin in subpart F, and equipment, tools, building, and sanitation in subpart L. We'll go into each of these in more detail and talk about the specific records that may be required for you to keep, but these are the subparts that deal specifically and have specific records identified with them. So let's move into just kind of thinking about, for your farm, which records would be required for you. And these images are taken from our record keeping guide that we will be sharing with you and going over in more detail later in today's presentation. So if you like it and you'd like to have a copy of this, good news, you're going to get it. So first of all, are you covered by the rule or not? That can sometimes be a good place to start, especially if you are a smaller farm or if this is new to you. And so number one, knowing if you qualify for a qualified exemption, and you would figure that out. You could talk to us, you could use our decision tool that we've created. There are lots of ways to figure out if you are qualified exemption, or if you are fully covered by the rule. And it's based on this verification form and your sales records. So here are two records that even if you are not covered by the whole rule, you will need to work through and document and submit in order to be eligible for this qualified exemption. So that is the qualified exemption verification form, which is available from our partners at the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. And you'll need to do this at least annually. And this just continues to verify that you are a qualified exempt farm. You are exempt from inspection, and they have this on file. And as necessary to document or to back up your qualified exemption verification, you would have to keep records of your sales for the 3-year period prior to the applicable calendar year that you are applying for exemption. So these two records are both available on the Idaho State Department of Agriculture's website. You can reach out to any of us and we will let you know where to find them. We can help you work through them if you need the assistance. And they are also included in our record keeping guide. So number one, find out if you're covered by the rule and keep those records because they will be important for continuing that documentation. So another one, and this is not as common in Idaho, but if you are growing covered produce, but you qualify for a commercial processing exemption, meaning maybe you grow tomatoes, which are a covered commodity, but all of your tomatoes go into ketchup or barbecue sauce. Then you may qualify for this commercial processing exemption. However, you do need to keep records, both a disclosure form for your farm that accompanies your produce shipment to the processor, and then the processor needs to document that they have received that product from you. And so these are two forms that we can share templates for you later, but this would be annually your commercial processing buyer would complete the written assurance form, and then you would also accompany every shipment of produce that goes into processing with the farm disclosure statement. So that kind of takes care of the two major exemptions from other record keeping and from full coverage of the rule. So let's talk about the records that are going to be required for almost all farms that are covered in some way under the FSMA produce safety rule. And this is not the exempt farms. This is you don't qualify for the qualified exemption. You are covered by the rule. So these are three primary records that we have talked about in the past. We've talked about in our trainings, and we're going to talk about again a little bit today. So at least annually, or as needed, but at least annually, you must have a record of your worker training. So anybody on the farm, you included, handling covered produce must be trained on food safety as it applies to their assigned duties. And so the training must document topics covered and personnel trained, and it does need to be signed off on. Another annual required form would be water distribution system inspection. So this is, again, as needed, but at least annually. you must inspect the water distribution system that is under your control for issues that may possibly lead to contamination of water used in irrigation or other covered activities. So this could be inspecting your wellhead, inspecting your pump, however you're getting your water, going to the source that you have under control and inspecting it. And we'll look at that form. And then cleaning and sanitizing. So it is, the produce safety rule does not tell you when you must clean and sanitize your tools, equipment, containers, and for food contact surfaces, but they do need to be cleaned and sanitized when necessary and as frequently as needed. And so when that happens, records of these activities must be kept. So keeping that cleaning and sanitizing log, and then also keeping any copies of the sanitizer that is used is a really good idea. But we'll talk about that cleaning and sanitizing log, and we'll look at some examples and some ways to do that as well. So these are going to be required by probably all the farms. Now we get into quite a number of other records that would be required if they were applicable, but may not be applicable to every farm. And this is really going to have to do with what crops you grow, how you grow them, and the different really unique situations on each of your farms. So if you are using groundwater for your farm, then you will need to have groundwater tests. If you are treating your water for any reason, then you will need to have records of the water treatment monitoring. If you are relying on microbial die-off or removal rates, if you're using maybe some kind of surface water in your operation, then the agricultural water die-off corrective actions records must be kept. And then if you are using surface water, then testing that water and having the results of that test in your documentation is also going to be something that you will need to do. Again, also, if you are using public water, you may use the test provided to you from a municipal water system, or you may test that yourself, but you will need to have that record. And then as necessary or as needed, any other water testing that you are doing, any alternative water treatments, any analytical methods that you are using to test your water, you must keep records of these activities and keep that documentation. And here are a few others. Again, these are not necessarily required by the rule, but they are going to be some of the best ways to document that you are following the practices outlined in the produce safety rule and that you are in compliance. Because again, if it's not documented, then it didn't happen. And so anything that you can keep a document on and have these records is going to help just to have that assurance and that verification that you are following certain practices. So this includes if you record illness and injury that happens on the farm, if you monitor and document your restroom cleaning. So, if an inspector asks, how often do you clean your restroom? And you give them an answer, there really isn't anything that backs up your answer. And this is very important with your rodent and pest monitoring. So having a record of pest and rodent monitoring is the best way to prove that you are taking the proper steps to ensure that pests and rodents don't contaminate produce and that you are aware of any issues that are happening. So a few others that you might consider using if you are applying soil amendments, especially those of animal origin, and you would like to be sure to convey that you are using maybe the proper amount of days in between that application and harvest, then you would want to keep that soil amendment application. And also, I don't think it was on that previous slide, but if you are purchasing compost or if you are making compost and you use it as a treated product, then you will need to have documentation on your compost treatment practices or documentation from the source of the compost that you purchase. Otherwise, it would be used as an untreated product. Maybe you keep a visitor log. This is a great way to verify that visitors coming to the farm are informed of farm policies and procedures, which is required under the rule. And then as necessary, any wildlife or domestic animal monitoring, if this is something that you've identified as a high risk on your farm. And then again, you are not required to, to use cold storage on your farm or for produce if it's, but if it is industry standard or if it is the way that you do business, then if you are having cold storage and keeping produce in cold storage, then you do need to calibrate and monitor your cold storage so that you know that it is working as intended. And then the worker training checklist. This is a great way to document that you are covering the topics that are needed for your farm, that workers are being trained on the topics that are applicable and relevant to their work. So this is not the same as the worker training log, which is required. This is basically what you cover in your trainings. And I've seen some great examples of this at some of the farms that we visited, where it is part of what the employees signed. So it's kind of covering both bases. And I really have seen some great examples that I would love to get copies of and share with you all. And I think we may have done some of that in our worker training webinars a couple years ago. All right, so those were the required records, right? But there are some specifics associated with all of these records. So subpart O of the produce safety rule goes into what needs to happen with your records, right? How they need to look, how they need to be kept, and some basics that have to be included in them. So under subpart O, all records, except as otherwise specified, all records required under this part must include, as applicable, the name and location of your farm, actual values and observations that are obtained during monitoring, an adequate description of a commodity, and when available, lot numbers if you are using lot numbers or any other identifiers of covered produce applicable to the record, so that the record really is related to a specific type of crop or batch of crop. And then the location of a growing area, so perhaps the number of the field or other descriptive terms that let you know really where that activity was happening to a very specific degree. In addition, these are other things that must be included on those records: the date and the time of the activity that you're documenting. These records need to be created at the time an activity is performed or observed, right? So this isn't, well, 3 weeks ago, we went and inspected this and now I'm documenting it. It should be in real time. It needs to be accurate, legible, and indelible, meaning that using, pen or marker, not pencil. It needs to be readable and not damaged. And it needs to be dated, signed, or initialed by the person who performed the activity. So whoever is doing the inspection, doing the review, doing the training is the one who is going to sign this record. And then in addition, the records that are required under all of these different sections must be reviewed, dated, and signed within a reasonable amount of time after the records are made by the supervisor or responsible party. So they need to be initialed or signed by the person performing the activity, and then they need to again be signed by the supervisor or the designated food safety individual on the farm. And then you must keep records required by this part for at least 2 years past the date the record was created. So keeping the past 2 years of records and making sure that they all have all of these components. So we wanted to take a second to talk about how our Idaho farms are doing. And one of the reasons for these webinars is to look at areas where farms may have struggled in the past year and try to address these trainings specifically to those needs. And so when I visited with our Idaho State Department of Ag inspectors and our program manager, Greg Blahato, these were some of the observations or out of compliance issues that were documented over the past year. Now, none of these, the information that I get, none of it is linked to any specific farm or farmer. These are just general observations, and this is not data that I have access to, but it does show that a number of out of compliance issues were observed during inspections that were related to record keeping, whether it was the records related to personnel qualifications, the general requirements of records, how records were stored, used, retained, acceptable formats, and then disclosure. And so we have on the webinar today, Greg Blahato, who is the program manager for the produce safety program at the Idaho State Department of Ag. And he's also been one of the inspectors for a number of years. And he was just going to come on and talk to us a little bit about what some of these look like on a farm and his kind of a take on where we could be doing better with record keeping. So Greg, are you ready to talk?
I am, Ariel. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
See if I can speak this morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being on the webinar today. I'd like to go over a few things that we commonly see on farms regarding record keeping that are out of compliance issues. And these are kind of some of the basic ones that we see year after year. They're kind of repeated occurrences. So basically, some common record keeping errors that we find are basically for like equipment tools or buildings used for covered activities. And covered activity would be the growing, harvesting, packing, and or holding of covered produce. Basically, we see that the records we see, either they don't have them or they're incomplete. And some of the issues we see in that category are some common out of compliance result from only select items having records. So any equipment, tools, or buildings used for covered activities must have a cleaning and when necessary, sanitizing records. So this would include anything like trucks, forklifts that you use to transport covered produce, and even bins that you would use to store your covered produce in. So you want to make sure that you have those records, for those items. And those are just some kind of off the wall kind of examples that I would use because they're not common ones that people think of. Everybody always has like their here's my restroom cleaning log and but the vehicles, forklifts, bins used to store items, the equipment itself, the belts, or items that use like tractors that are used for harvesting, those are the ones we usually see that do not have records associated with them. So monitoring, another one under that category, basically monitoring for pests is required under the produce safety rule for fully enclosed buildings. So keeping pest control monitoring records is the best way to show when this has been completed, what pests, if any, you're finding, and can help identify trends that you might see. If you're always seeing where one mouse trap, for example, every time you check it, you're seeing that there's a mouse in it. If you're logging that every time, then you can look at that log and identify a trend that, hey, we're always seeing mice coming in from this area. We should check and see, do we have an area where mice are coming in? Is there something that's causing the mice to come into this area? So it's a good way to track trends, and when we're going to want to see those, we're going to want to see the records that you're keeping for that, and what are you seeing, and what's being done about that. Another common area that we see where records are missing or incomplete is basically for employee training. I think Ariel had touched on this a bit earlier. Some common missing training records include employees that were hired on different dates. Maybe you did one mass hiring on, let's say, the 15th of the month, but then towards a week later, you hired 2 or 3 people. So maybe you did that when you did that mass hiring, you did a training there, but those 2 or 3 people that came in after weren't trained. Because when we come out to do an inspection, those are the people that are going to be working, and those are the people that I'm going to ask to see the records on. Can I see the record for this person, this person? Those will be the people that you don't have the records for because they were missed. Another thing would be if somebody was absent during the training. You want to make sure if somebody's absent that they get caught up on that training. Borrowed employees. A lot of times we see, especially with the labor shortage that's going on right now, we know that places will be sharing employees. So you want to make sure that employees are trained on the specific to your environment or your operation, I should say. The other big one we see is employees that were trained in a prior year. So you might have someone who's been with you for 5 or 10 years, and you know that they know how to do their job. So did they really need to go to the training? Yeah, they do. Because the produce safety rule requires that all employees are trained upon hire and at least once annually. So getting those employees, your seasoned employees in there, to the training is going to be crucial because it is a requirement. Correct. That is, it goes for all supervisors and farm owners too. Especially when you we see a lot of operations where it's a 1 or 2 person operation. Maybe it's the person and their brother, person and their spouse, whatever the case might be. Do we really have to do this? It's just me, or it's just the 2 of us? Yes. And for those single person operations, we have videos on our website that you can watch that will cover these requirements. Training records are often missing required information. Sometimes they're not dated or they're missing the signature of the person conducting the training. That's another common one. Yeah, this webinar does count. Another common one we see is records used for some audits versus records used for produce safety. Records required by some audits, they may differ slightly from records required by the produce safety rule. So if you're only using one set of records, if you've got your GAP book or something there, and that's the book that you're going to use, you want to compare the records required by the produce safety rule and compare the records required for GAP. Take the form or the template that is the most comprehensive, it has the most information on it, and make sure it's got, excuse me, all the information that's required for both the audit that you're doing and the produce safety inspection, because then that way you can use one record for both. So we see a lot where basically they might be missing a farm name or a farm address on a record that they're using for an audit that they're going to use for produce safety. So that would be an out of compliance that we would be, it's an easy fix. We can do a corrected on site on it, but it still would be an out of compliance issue if you're missing some of the information that's required on a produce safety audit, or excuse me, produce safety inspection. So those are the biggest areas that we see when we're doing inspections. Something I would like to add, a couple things I'd like to add to this is consistency is vital when keeping your records. If you're going to do it once, do it always. Don't just do it because you know that we're coming, or that you're getting an audit. A lot of times people will pull out records and at first glance, the records look very complete. And then when we look at it and we say, oh yeah, this is very complete, but it's all from last year. So you've got all your records from last year. Where's the stuff from this year? Oh, we just haven't gotten around to that yet. So you want to make sure if you're going to do it once, do it always. And the last thing I'd like to add, as Ariel mentioned, it's kind of our mantra here. I guess the best way to put it is documentation or it didn't happen. If we come out there and we're asking to see a record of something and you don't have a record for it, but I just did it, I don't have a record for it. If it's a record that we are required to review, it is going to be something, it would be an out of compliance for you. And we want to avoid that as much as possible. So when you're performing that task, once you're done with that task and you've reviewed it and you're confident it was done correctly, then filling out that record, that record that should be close by, and making sure that it is complete. So that's it. That's what I've got, Ariel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. And if you do have any questions that you want to ask just of Greg and I, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And if you have general questions, you can put them in the chat. We could spend a lot of time really just digging into each of these records. And I would just say, if you have any questions or you're struggling with a particular record keeping task, reach out to me and we can work through that, But the rest of what we're going to talk about today is hopefully going to help you to make some of that easier and to get some tools so that you're not having to start from scratch. So thank you very much, Greg, for that insight into what we're talking about today. So now we're going to shift gears from the records that are required under the produce safety rule and really into the act of record keeping itself. So we're going to look at some tools, some techniques, and some resources to help all of us be better record keepers and to utilize the help that is out there for us. So first, I just wanted to go through some general good key principles that lead to better record keeping. So I did quite a bit of research looking at different articles, different sources for information about this, both related to agriculture and also not. And so here are a few things that came to the top. So number one, are the records authentic, right? Are they true and do they have credible signatures and dates? So we talked about how records for the produce safety rule need to be happening in real time as the event is happening and they're being documented, as it happens. And they also need to be initialed by the person that is there and they need to be dated and then reviewed. So all of this goes toward ensuring that your records are authentic. Next, are they accurate, right? Do they really reflect the activities or the processes that you're trying to document? And this would go along with the completeness of a record, really showing enough detail that you know that they are accurate. And again, that goes up to that authenticity of did it happen at that time and who was there to see it. And accessible, I think this has two different meanings, right? So is the record keeping convenient to the site of activities? Is it easy to keep that record because it is right there and accessible to you when you are performing that activity or documenting that activity? And then on the other side, are they accessible in that can you pull those records readily when needed? When you get a question from a buyer, when there's some kind of issue, when you are having your inspection on farm, how accessible are those records to get to and to review? So we continue on. Hold on just a second. Oh, I was going to have Greg send some resources throughout this, but I don't know. We might have to put them all in at the end. Okay, anyway, but going on, sorry about that. Good record keeping key principles. We just talked about them being authentic and accurate and accessible. And in addition, let's look at, are they complete? Are your records detailed enough in their content, context, and structure to document the relevant activities and processes that they document? Are you telling the whole story in that record keeping? So think about how much you can certainly overdo it and be too complete. But if you look at that record, are you able to clearly understand what was happening and what this record was referencing? And comprehensive, right? So this goes along with that complete. Are they comprehensive enough? Does it have enough detail? Is it not only the who and the where and the what and the when, but maybe the how and the why? And then also, do they have the necessary pieces that are required by the documentation requirement? So that brings us into compliance, right? Are the records that we're keeping compliant with the requirements and regulations that are guiding some of that record keeping? There are certainly records that you are going to keep because they are really beneficial to your business to keep, right? They give you key information about your practices. They keep you on track. They document your profitability or they help you in planning. But then there are some records that honestly, maybe you wouldn't keep unless they were required by either your audit scheme or by by FSMA. So in those cases, are those records really doing the trick? We've looked at some great records that, like Greg said, are missing one or more pieces. Maybe they're not stored properly. Maybe they don't have the supervisor's signature. So, if it doesn't contain all of those required parts, then it's not going to be compliant. So what else? Are your records effective? So this is where I think about records that their effectiveness or their usefulness goes beyond just, I've got the documents and I'm ready for inspection and I'm going to pass inspection, and that's the only reason that I keep this record. And Greg kind of mentioned this, this is a way for you to really track your progress, track your success, make informed decisions on the farm, whether you want to change something or you want to continue doing something in the way that it's been being done. Your records can help confirm or inform your farm decision-making processes. And then secure. So this is, this can have a lot of different meanings and can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but are your records securely maintained to prevent either unauthorized access, alteration, damage, or removal? So this could be, do you have a plastic sheet over a record that might be kept in the wash pack area so that it's not getting wet? Or, if this is information about your employees with sensitive documents that might involve them, how are those records kept? Are they kept locked, or are they kept on a secure server? Again, security can go a few different ways. And are they secure enough that you can access them again in 2 years, right? And so thinking about security, is the degree of security appropriate to the sensitivity and the importance of the contents of those records? So that can really be something to think about, especially as we move into talking about digital record keeping. So what is working for you? So this is a good time to think about, your current form and style of record keeping. What could make that easier or more effective? Is there something that you feel like could help you with that? And that's what we'll talk about in this next little section. So number one, a really good piece of advice. And so these next examples were really taken directly from examples that had to do with agriculture. So understanding kind of the special needs around agricultural record keeping. So number one, get all your records in one place, or at least not 10 places, right? There are a lot of different places that we are collecting data. There are a lot of different places that you are from day to day. And there might very well be records in all of them, right? So if you think about the different places where you may have records, and this is, I think, probably true for lots of people, not just those involved in agriculture, but you might have records in your packing house, on the truck floor, taped to the barn walls, on your kitchen table, in the glove compartment, on your dashboard, in shoe boxes, in your shirt pocket, and the list could go on, right? And this is a great reminder for those of you that had taken our Produce Safety Alliance grower trainings, and you remember me talking about the Farm Food Safety Plan. Have you started your Farm Food Safety Plan yet? Remember, it is not required for FSMA. It is required for GAP and some of the other third-party audits, but it can be the best place to collect and store and organize your records. So get your records in a few less places, perhaps. What tools are you already using? So thinking about your comfort level, if you are thinking aspirationally, like I would love to have all my records be digital. Well, how comfortable are you using technology right now? Just because somebody else is using it or it seems like the best way to do something doesn't mean that it's always the best way for you to do it if you're not comfortable with using those tools. So, a pen and paper is easy, quick, and accessible. You can do it on the run. You don't have to have any electricity, but also paper can get wet. It can get lost. It can get smeared. And remember that requirement for our records to be readable and indelible. But do digital tools align with your needs and your practices? Are there ways to use smartphones, tablets, and computers in a way that would actually make your record keeping easier, or would it complicate things? So laptops and desktop computers, for me personally, this is the way I like to look at anything complicated because my eyes are not as great as they used to be. And I really like to have that big screen, right, where I can look at a lot of data and I can manage it, and it's easier for me to handle. But if you've got a tablet, that can sometimes be a lot more flexible. It can go places that your big desktop computer can't, and it can be portable. But in order to access information immediately, or maybe even collect some sorts of data, you might need to have Wi-Fi or a hotspot where you are with that tool. And then our phone is always with us, it seems like. But how do you use it? And that isn't like a, well, I don't know how to use my phone. It's how are you using your phone? Do you use it primarily for communication? Do you actually use it as a phone to make calls? Do you use it to text? Or do you like to use apps and other things? And do you have your phone connected to your other tools? So that could be really helping you to understand if a phone is a great way for you to be collecting data and keeping records. So can your tech do some of the talking? So are you already using tools that are talking to you or talking to each other? And I think about my washing machine. I could hook that up so that it could talk to my cell phone. And I have not yet figured out why I would want it to do that, but it's a possibility. So especially in agriculture and precision agriculture, the larger scale farms, you probably have a lot of tech that is already talking to you and is already talking to each other, whether it's in some kind of monitoring or surveillance. There are probably tools and technology that monitor and share data in real time and that can communicate that information to your digital devices and maybe save some of the human time in recording or transferring those documents from paper and pen to a computer or something. So examples could include weather stations, temperature monitors. If you're using any kind of other drones or anything, even that could also be part of that, right? So think about tech that can talk to you. And then another really good tip is sharing the workload, right? So this is very hard for a lot of farmers. It's hard for a lot of people, right? To delegate tasks to other people on the farm. You may be Superman, Superwoman, but really maybe this is something that others could do. So think about who is in charge of what aspects of record keeping. If you are on this call because you are the supervisor, and you are the farm food safety contact, then yes, you are going to need to be in charge of signing off on those records occasionally and monitoring that the record keeping is being done. But maybe you don't have to be the one that daily keeps those logs and daily completes those records. If you do move to some kind of digital record keeping, would it allow multiple users to access and update information quicker and easier? That is something else to think about. And are others on the farm comfortable with your systems and know what and how to record key information? So this is, I think this is really endemic in really any industry that maybe is, especially family-run businesses, right? There's a way that you do it and a way that you like to do it, and nobody else can understand it. And that means that you can't pass it off either, and you can't have someone else do it. So thinking about, streamlining your systems, maybe adopting systems that everyone can use so that you aren't the only one that is in charge of that, because it is impossible for you to be at 5 locations at once, documenting all the key information that needs to happen. So think about that a little bit, taking some of the things off your plate. And then establishing routines, so making it habitual to keep records. So whether you're keeping paper records or digital record keeping, it really requires consistency so that those records meet all of the requirements. Is your record keeping built into your regular schedules? Is time for record keeping included when you think about budgeting time for tasks or time for work? Record keeping should be in that work. And it really can be helpful to dedicate specific time, space, and materials to ensure that your paper or digital records are being current and maintained, and also to prevent that backlog of having to go back and redo these, because like we talked about, that FSMA produce safety rule requires your records to be current and to be kept at the time that something is happening. All right, so the next 15 minutes or a little bit less of the presentation, we're going to look at some of the digital tools that are out there that can help you. And I know we're going to go a little fast, so if there's something that you want to revisit, reach out to me. We could set up a time to talk. We can walk through these in more detail. Or if you've got a friend or another farmer that you know that is really savvy with some of these things, ask them how they're doing it, because there is a lot out there. And again, your comfort level, your experience is really going to guide how much you want to participate in this or not. And the digital tools that we're going to share, even if you are a paper and pen record keeper, these templates, if you have a printer or access to a printer, then you can certainly use these tools in a much more analog format. So first, I did want to share that there are commercially available software and apps out there that you can purchase that can assist you with record keeping. I don't have personal experience with any of them. I am not promoting any of these. Certainly, I would not get, there would not be a benefit to me to promote these. I just wanted to make you aware that there are things out there. But before I would plunk down any money on a system, I would ask for that demo of it. I would find out if anybody else in your area is using it. And I would really try to find out how well some of the data that it's collecting is either directly applicable to the record keeping requirements that you have. And also, you really want to know about the security of these records and, who owns them and the access to them. So a grain of salt, anything that is, being promoted to a farm to use, I'd want to do a little bit of digging to find out if it would really be worth the while and the expense. But this was just one that is out there, Crop Tracker, that can generate some records that can be used in a third-party food safety audit. If you've gone through our trainings, you know that the Produce Safety Alliance does have a number of templates out there that are free to use. They are in Microsoft Word, and you can print them out and write on them with pen and paper, or you can use them in Word and fill out those templates. So they have examples of all of the required and many of the optional records. And we've been handing these out for a long time, and we think that they are quite useful and they're well done. So I've got a QR code here, and I was hoping to be able to put the links in the chat, but I don't think that I can do it while I'm sharing my screen. And it didn't seem like Greg had access to the chat, but I thought we're going to keep working on it because we would like to be able to share these with you in real time as we are going through. And actually, I think, Greg, I just made you co-host, so I think that you'll be able to do it now if you want to give it a try. All right, so we've got our Produce Safety Alliance grower templates. Again, these are really useful, and there are multiples of these. So another resource that we have shared with you if you've been through our trainings that we are just revamping a little bit and will be available back on our website here very shortly. And this is our University of Idaho Extension Record Keeping Guide. So it is both printable and now new and improved. It is fillable PDF templates. So you can fill out the PDF templates and print as many as you need or save as many as you need. And again, we have examples for all of the required and all of the optional records. And so this guide goes into detail, the things that we talked about in the beginning of today's training, which records are required by which parts. It gives you an example of how that record might look filled out, and then it gives you a blank that you can fill out yourself. And so I have made two files. I have one that is the whole record keeping guide, but then I have one that is just the fillable PDFs, and we're going to share all of those with you. And they will, if you're not quick enough to grab them in the chat, we will be sending those all out in a follow-up email to everyone that registered for the webinar. So this can be really helpful. And like I said, the fillable PDF, you just open it and you can just type into all of these squares, and it's for every one of the records. And that was actually something that was suggested by one of you in one of our classes or trainings. So thank you. We do pay attention to what you tell us. So one other thing I wanted to share with you, and this is using Google Forms to create online record keeping. So this was really interesting. This is a little bit more complicated because you have to kind of build these tools And some of you may or may not be comfortable with that. But our friend Phil Taco, who I have met at several food safety conferences throughout the years, he's from Michigan State University. He's been involved with food safety for a long time. He put together this article on how to use free Google Forms to really ramp up your mobile digital record keeping. And so I've got a QR code here to that article. We'll also put the link in the chat to his article, but it goes through step by step how to use Google Forms to create your own records that meet the requirements and also digitize and capture your data. So this was really interesting. I read through the whole thing and I used his instructions, and I'm going to show you kind of the basics of how it works right now. So you have to have a Google account, right, which many people do. And so you would log into your Google account. And then when you go over here and you look at all the different apps that are associated with your Google account, whether it's Mail or Google Drive, etc., you might have to click this More from Google once or twice to get to Forms, because it's not one of the first ones that come up. But once you find Forms, you would click on it. And this is going to take you to the place where you can create these forms. So this is the page that you would see after you click on Forms. And again, it had some like templates that were already here. So if you want to throw a birthday party for your grandma and you want to get people involved, you could just use that template. But there were no ready-made Google templates for what we're talking about. So most likely you're going to have to click on Start a New Form. And I will give you a freebie here in a minute, though. So you would start a form, and this is kind of what it looks like. You have all these suggestions, and you can add or subtract questions. You can make all the fields that you want to. And so, give yourself some time to play with this. It was pretty intuitive, I felt, if you've ever used any kind of survey tool. But I felt that it was really interesting. And so I experimented a little bit. I made two different tools. One was this cleaning and sanitation log. I just started to kind of mess around with, okay, so if I was going to want to just keep track of my cleaning and sanitation, while I was involved, I would want to collect it this way. So thinking about those required components, I put right there the name and address of my pretend farm, because I was just messing around with this. And this was just kind of the start of it, is collecting the date and the time. And then going down, I would put in like what was cleaned, what was sanitized, what was used, my initials, and then a space for it to be reviewed later by someone else. And so it was not really hard at all. So once you've completed and made your form, you can test it, you can send it to others by using that send button. And you can send it to yourself, you can send it to your workers. You can either do it through email, or you can create a link, you can embed it on a website. And so this is a great way to share that out. So this was the Google form. And then the other cool feature is that then you can actually get the responses and you can download them as spreadsheets, or however you would like to interpret that data. So I thought that could be really helpful. So if you wanted to take a look at it and see the other record that I created a template for the annual water distribution system inspection. Since this is one that you're often doing, somewhere a little bit more remote, maybe multiple locations. So it made sense for this to be a mobile document. So if you use this QR code or the link, you can go straight to this form as it would look as if you created it. Now, if you submit anything, I'm going to get this data. So don't submit anything real. But if you just wanted to see how it looks and kind of how it might feel looking at it on a mobile device or on a computer device. Yeah, so I'll give you just a second to take a look at that. And again, so if this was my my own record, I would probably put the farm name and address just right there, built into the record. So it wasn't anything I ever had to enter. But this was just kind of playing around with it. Okay. So if this is something that you think you might like, I actually did find out there is a way for me to create templates and then share them with you. So if you know I keep working on these, or if you like these and you'd like to have more of these created, I could create them and have a library of them that I can share. So I did figure out how to do that. So if you would like to use this in your own Google to create a form, this QR code and the next link is going to take you to the template where you can adopt it as your own. If you just went to the QR code that I shared before, that is as if this is my form and your data is going to be collected by me. But if you want to create your own version for your farm, you would follow this link and then you would build it on your own Google. So that was really interesting too, something I'm just kind of learning about and just playing around with, and would like to do more of that if some of you think that this is something you would like to do. So let us know in the follow-up or after the training if that's something you'd be interested in. Yeah, so that link and that QR code would take you to adopting this as your own template. All right, so I know that was really fast. If that is something that is really interesting to you, we could always schedule another training just going through and building those together. But I just thought it was really interesting that there are many ways to do this, and probably as many ways as there are farmers, and that is pretty typical. So in closing, I just wanted to kind of go back over that record keeping is a necessary part of life, farming, and the FSMA produce safety rule. And your coverage under the rule and the practices and the activities on your farm are going to determine some of the records that you're required to keep. There are many, many options for how to keep records, but just remember that whether they're on paper, they're on a smartphone, they're in a spreadsheet, they need to include the farm name and location, the actual values and observations obtained during monitoring, a description of the commodity or covered produce, the location of the growing area, and the date and time of the activity documented. They also must be created at the time the activity is being performed or observed. They must be accurate, legible, and indelible, drafted and dated and signed or initialed by the person who performed the activity, reviewed, dated, and signed within a reasonable amount of time by a supervisor or responsible party. So your records don't have to look any particular way, but they do have to contain all of these pieces. And there are many tools and templates available to help you succeed. So like I said, we're going to make sure all of these are available to you after this. And if you have any questions or you would like help with any of these, I really encourage you to reach out, because this is something that we can provide you and we can help you work through. So are there any questions before I do my last closing slides and reminders about upcoming webinars? All right, well, seeing none, thank you so much. I am going to just remind you that we have one more webinar coming up next week, and it's one I'm very excited about. We have Alexa Johnson of the Nevada Department of Agriculture coming on talking about growing microgreens and mushrooms with food safety in mind. So coming out of the field and going indoors into new territory for food safety. Greg has posted the link if you have not registered. If you registered for this one, you probably got registered for all of them, but just in case, we put that out. And then we have over 13 hours of our previous webinar series recorded and on our YouTube channel for you to look at. So we would love for you to be able to go and look at those. We also have our training videos that are shorter, really focused topics. So like I said, almost now today, there's over 14 hours of webinar content related to food safety. So if you're looking for that annual training for your supervisors or yourself, that's a great place to look. Just, document that you attended that training. And then we really, really appreciate your feedback. It goes into designing these webinar surveys. It goes into the tools that we put together to assist you. So you're going to get a link to a 3-minute feedback survey when the webinar closes. And we really ask that you give us your feedback. It's very quick, and we do value your interest and your input very much. So Thank you so much for today for attending. We hope to see you next week talking about our microgreens and our mushrooms. So thank you and happy record keeping. And thank you, Greg, for jumping on today as well.